Right, lovely, Anna Stevens. Part 2 with you. Are you ready to be questioned?
I mean, yes. I'm slightly nervous the way you phrased it, but
It's extremely threatening, wasn't it?
Shall I put a spotlight on my own face? Would that help?
Yeah, I feel like everything's better with pressure. I think it's good for people.
I feel
I'm
complicit
definitely
in a
feeling
crime.
it now.
You feel complicit
You feel
in a crime.
dirty.
I do. Ah.
Well, you dirty boy, help me with
Oh,
these
no.
questions.
It started.
Right, behave me. What's the first story you wrote that meant something to you?
Wow. So you're just going to come out with the hard ones at the start, are you?
It's a
Okay.
bit unpleasant, isn't it? It's a bit unfriendly.
The first one that meant something to me. I'm actually going to say, this is probably going to sound like a cop-out, but I'm actually going to say my debut novel, Godblind, but not the version that is published, but the very first version. So the first time that I completed a novel.
That crunchy warts and all manuscript.
Are we
Yes,
talking first draft or like an edited, you were sort of going to try and sell that version?
Well, so the story of like most authors that you speak to, they're going to say, oh yeah, I wrote 5 books before I got an agent, or I wrote 7 books and they were all terrible, but my 8th book was good, or whatever. What I did was I wrote Godblind over and over and over again for 13 years.
Whoa.
And that was the book that landed me an agent. So it was the only book. No, that's not true. I did write a very bad sci-fi novel. But I just kept on rewriting the same book. And every time I rewrote it, it got a little bit better. But I have a soft spot for the very first draft, even though it was the most overblown, ridiculous, flowery, awful thing you've ever read in your life. But it was the first thing that I'd actually got all the way to the end with.
Yeah.
But it is very, very funny when people ask about the journey of that particular book, because it ended up being marketed as a grimdark novel. And it was the first draft. It was a classic high fantasy.
Oh, wow.
So the characters literally were all inverted over the period of 13 years, from wonderful, beautiful princesses and noble warriors to, a bunch of cutthroats and degenerates and bloodthirsty priestesses and what have you.
I think I love that, though. I think that's a really interesting way to write a book, isn't it? To write it in this very sort of high, almost like binary, good and evil style, and then just turn it on its head and be like, actually, it's the other way around.
And slowly too, like deviancy by degrees.
Yeah, deviancy by degrees. That's a good line.
Yeah. Everyone got slowly stained as the years went by. But that is something that a lot of people comment on about my work now, is that they're like, it's never clear cut. So in any of my, I've just handed in line edits on book 3 of The Songs of the Drowned. So that's 6 epic fantasy novels, almost complete now. And what people say to me time and again is, everyone is slightly bad, but mostly good, or mostly bad but slightly good, or whatever the other one is. I don't know if I've just said the same thing twice.
No, I think you got it right.
And they're all like, why is everyone so morally grey? And I'm like, well, this is just people being people, but it's got to the point where I really love writing characters like that. So in the Songs of the Drowned trilogy, there are 2 sides of the conflict. There's the Empire of Songs, and then there are the people who are trying to fight against it. And some of my most relatable and well-rounded and in some sense decent characters are actually the villains, because they're just, they're just people who happen to live in the Empire of Songs, and they believe in the Empire of Songs and what it's trying to do, and they believe that they are civilizing these lands that they conquer, and that's a good thing, and it's just, I've always really loved sort of twisting those perceptions around so that you can't look at any one character. Hopefully you can't look at any one character and go, that's a bad guy or that's a good guy. I try really hard to put something in everyone that makes you think, oh God, I really liked you. What did you have to go and do that for? Because to me, that's just people being people.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is a big old tangent from the question you started with.
No, but it's that I think that's you've really shown us how, like, why it meant something to you, because it was almost like the starting point of your journey with that novel.
Yeah, definitely. It sort of, I think I needed to get all of that. The good guys are only good and the bad guys are only bad out of my system.
Yeah.
Before I could start writing redeeming qualities into absolutely awful people.
Do you find yourself using that lens on real people now? Like trying to work out if people are mostly good with bad bits or mostly bad with good bits?
I mean, I am, despite what people would think from the fiction that I write, I am an extremely cheerful and optimistic person, and I will deliberately see the good in everyone until they give me a reason not to. But perhaps when they do give me a reason not to, I'm not always surprised. So maybe that does come from writing these very complex characters.
I like that. I think I feel like I've connected a bit with that, because I think I don't know whether we need to go into this really, but for myself, I definitely feel like at that point that you described, you assume people are good and give them that space to breathe, and then if they do sort of, it turns out that they are potentially not, or they behave inappropriately or whatever. I think it takes me a while to actually wake up and remove those blinders initially, and I'd really like to be able to be a bit quicker with that, and I feel like that's potentially something that you perhaps possess innately.
I mean, I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything wrong in, hoping that you've been mistaken and that maybe they're not as bad as they are. But if they do prove themselves to be that way, whatever that way might be, then yeah, I think it is just a case of, to protect yourself and those you love, you just got to draw a line in the sand and say, well, no, actually, we're not having that.
When you've drawn that line, do you find that you then work out your issues with that person on the page in your work?
I would be lying if I said there wasn't a particular character in one of my books who was an old manager of mine who who in the book, I must stress this, in the book gets beaten to death with a hammer.
Excellent, nice.
But in general, I think I don't look at characters and go, oh, that is definitely such and such. I might sort of, particularly with my first trilogy, I think because I was very much still learning my craft and sort of very much out of my depth a lot of the time. I sort of based most of my point of view characters for my first trilogy around a single particular core emotion or core personality trait. And some of those were based on people. So, for instance, Commander Durdil, who was the chief of the army, basically, his driving impulse, the seed that he was built around, was duty. And I did base that on my dad because he was a firefighter.
Right.
Cool.
And so I sort of grew up knowing that, well, not when I was very little, but once I was old enough to understand what he did, I was very aware of the fact that he might not come home from shift one day.
Yeah.
And that, you know, it was sort of, we had a lot of other kids whose parents were firefighters, and we sort of grew up in that a very quite small community of, you know, you had like your regular school friends, but then it would be, or there's going to be a fire brigade social, and you go and meet all your other friends, your firefighting family friends. And there was very much a sense that we all had that, yeah, you know, your dad might not come home. But as we got older, we realized that it wouldn't be necessarily because of an accident or a fire or something like that, that, you know, I mean, they would choose to save someone. And if that meant they died, then so be it. You know, it was that sense of duty, is that I will give my life for a complete stranger, and I will do it without hesitating, without second thought. And that, you know, that obviously was quite formative for me as a kid. So yeah, so the character of Durdil in the Godblind trilogy is his guiding principle is that same sense of duty.
What a lovely insight. That's a really strong connection to that character. That's so cool, but also really meaningful. I like that a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
it feels a bit cheap to go straight into the next question here, but like, would this be a good place for people to start reading your work? Is this the book that they should start with, or if not, where should they start?
I mean, because I also write tie-in fiction, so really it depends on what sort of, it's all fantasy, so it depends on what type of fantasy you like. The Godblind trilogy, as I said, was marketed as grimdark. It is very no holds barred on the war and physical violence, and it's extremely sweary as well. So, you know, if you're not into your sort of high levels of gore and the hamstringing of horses, and, you know, that kind of very medieval, nasty, you know, Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones.
I mean, you had me at hamstringing. That's where you had me.
Are we,
well, there you go. In that case, you need to start with the Godblind trilogy.
Excellent.
We have to ask in this instance, are there any on-page geldings? This is a conversation we had recently.
Okay, so it's not a gelding. Well, I mean, he certainly ends up without his testicles. There is a scene in the first book, Godblind, that is colloquially known among people who have read it as the hammer scene.
Oh God!
This is not the person who got beaten to death with a hammer. That was in the second book. There is the gods of blood. I mean, I was quite heavy-handed with the naming of them, I will admit. But the gods of blood are a very powerful pair of deities, but they have to be summoned through very sort of intense, gory, pain-ridden rituals. And so there is the hammer scene, where basically a man is hung upside down with his legs spread, and there's a hammer and there's a couple of nails.
Oh, wow!
And I wrote it in the most visceral way I possibly could. I was just like, I'm going for this. It is born out of, I don't know if you remember, but in the early 90s, they rebooted a lot of horror films. So they rebooted The Hills Have Eyes and all that. And it became like a real kind of torture porn. How much further can we go? How much worse can we make it? And that wasn't the reason why I wrote the scene the way I did. It was the other thing that happened during that same period with a lot of these films was there was so much on-screen in-depth rape. And I remember one film where I can't remember the title of it now. It was a remake where a family go and stay at a lake house. The daughter gets raped and the parents set out to hunt down and kill her rapist. They remade that film, and the scene where the girl is assaulted, there were so many close-ups, there were so many long lingering shots as if it was like a love scene. It was just, and it really kind of messed with my head a lot. And there was a lot of these films happening at the time. So when I wrote the first draft of that particular scene, it was 100% a response to all of these, directors, writers, producers who thought that it was okay to keep on showing these scenes on screen. And I thought, you know what? How would you like it? How would you like it if the worst possible thing that could happen to your genitals happened?
Yeah.
And then I wrote what I thought to be the worst possible thing.
I am both glad and horrified that I asked, but you're on.
Most people are when they ask that.
The hammer scene.
Most people ask, what is the hammer scene, Anna? And then they go, oh my God.
And then they fucking find out is what happens.
Yeah, and then fuck around, you'll find out.
Right.
So if you're not into that type of fiction, then you could start with the Songs of the Drowned trilogy, which is a trilogy of war and conquest, but it has a very firm focus on colonialism and what it's like to be both the colonizer and the colonized, and how lives can be ruined and lives can be changed by the act of colonizing.
Yeah.
But it's also very heavy on magic use and shamanism, and there is a type of water monster called the Drowned, and it was inspired by the Mayan and Aztec people of Mesoamerica, so of ancient Central America.
Oh, that's exciting.
So if you want, a secondary world fantasy that has its roots in not medieval Europe, then you might want to check those out.
I think that sounds extremely enticing, because it is you can't really swing a stick without hitting a fantasy that's heavily inspired by medieval Europe. Is it? Like, it's just sort of where that comes from, and even then you only really get like the differences between like Western Europe and Central Europe and Eastern Europe in the So interesting. I like that. This next one is potentially, is it your new favorite question, Nico?
I just like the little fella.
I can't do the voice, so you're gonna have to ask it.
Should we bring him in? Hello, you're right. Yes, thank you. You're abducted by aliens. There's one here, and they offer you a choice. Go on, that's you. Either we will probe you, or you may give us a book to read to better understand you. What book are you going to give him?
So the probing isn't actually an answer then. I can't go.
I mean, you can choose
the probe.
Right. So no. Okay. So a book that would to better understand me or to better understand humanity.
You please.
Good Lord.
We have many books on human anatomy.
Book to better understand me.
Am I doing okay? You're fine. You're fine, mate.
That's a really tough question.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think what was my favorite book as a kid. Whether that would work. I think in a very roundabout way, the book that probably made me a fantasy writer is called Duncton Wood by William Horwood.
Okay.
And it is actually there's actually 6 books in the Duncton Wood series. And they are it sounds so bizarre to explain it. It's a book about, when you get these anthropomorphized animal books. So like Watership Down is obviously the classic example. Red Wall, yeah, exactly. So it's one of those, but it's about moles in the English countryside.
Oh, cool.
But I don't even know if moles do live like this, but they live in the books. They live in sort of very communal systems. So it's almost like a rabbit warren, but it's moles. I don't know if that is actually how I thought they were solitary creatures. Anyway, and it is this big sort of epic 6-book saga about two different tribes of moles who have different religions, and they have different outposts, and they go on epic journeys between cities, and there's like it's a little bit there's like a chosen one, and then the chosen one's son, who is must sacrifice himself so that all the other it's a little bit Christian, but also that all the other moles can survive. There's epic disasters when rivers flood the tunnels and all this kind of stuff. And I was animal crazy as a kid, and I think I probably read Duncton Wood when I was about 10 or 11, and it's very much adult fiction, but because it is about animals, I don't know, it may be more palatable to kids.
So
it's often a method, isn't it, to just make everybody animals, and then you can tell whatever the hell you want.
yeah I mean, there's like actual sex scenes in there as well between moles. Which is a little bit odd, and also quite confusing when you're 10, I would imagine.
Do they do it in the moletionary position, or?
Oh, that was low.
That was bad. That was bad. I need to get a beer just to get over that.
Well, what I was actually going to ask was there anything that there's like specifically moley to the plot? Like loads of stuff gets lost temporarily because no one can fucking see anything, or could they have been anything?
I mean, he did. I think he sort of embraced their physical attributes. They've got excellent sense of smell, and they're very good in the dark, and they're excellent architects in a way. So like diggers, and create these massive, elaborate tunnels and systems and stuff like that.
No, this is explaining.
But I honestly couldn't tell you why he chose moles. It could. Maybe he too had read Watership Down and wanted to do something similar, but not too similar. So he was like, well, what else lives underground? Moles! I don't know.
I'm really enjoying how much this alien is going to have to unpack this novel.
Yeah.
And then potentially read the next 5 as well to really get it. If the alien gets hooked. Yeah.
I'm really hung up on the banging moles.
I don't blame you.
So the book just naturally falls open at that bit of the story.
It's been read so many times. The Lady Chatterley of moles.
Yeah. So when you have the transition between these questions, I'm really struggling with it today.
It's not smooth.
Should I leave?
We're on such wonderful tangents every time. I love it. When you have your first draft of any of your novels, or even before that, what is your editing process? Like, could you actually identify how you edit your work?
Okay, so I am one of those extremely unfortunate individuals who is known as a pantser. So I don't outline. I will know who the characters are, and I will know most of the world, and I will know that certain things need to happen. But other than that, I just write blind. And how I get to those things that need to happen is anyone's, it's just up for grabs. It's just whatever happens next.
Yeah.
So what this means is that I will get to the end of the draft and I will go, wow, that is shockingly bad. But what I know is that that is not the story. So basically I write, 150,000 words, and then I will keep probably 40% of the plot and maybe 30,000 actual words, and then I just start and write the book again.
So do you actually go through and cut out the bits you want to keep?
Yes.
Or right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
okay.
I have I have a cut scenes document for every book I write. For instance, book 3 in the Songs of the Drowned is 186,000 words long. And the cut scenes document is 147,000 words long.
Oh, good grief.
So that's how much I cut out. And then I keep, and I'm like, oh, I can use that bit later on. And then it just never gets used because I just rewrite the book completely. It's awful. It takes so long.
Sounds like it does, yeah. So like what time frame are we talking, like to go from that first draft to handing it into your editor?
I mean, the contract is for a book a year. So it tends to take, I would say, depending on how much time I've got. I was actually writing full time for a while. I went back into full time work last October, but before that I was writing full time, which did make things a lot easier on the having to rewrite everything twice.
Yeah.
I think I drafted book 3 in about 5 months, and then realized what I wanted and what I didn't want, and then rewrote it with because I had such a much better sense of the characters and the direction and what needed to happen. I then rewrote it in about 3 months. But I know that is again, I was writing full time. I was literally writing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6-7 days a week towards the end.
Crikey.
So I know it's extremely unstandard. And now that I'm back at work full time, I write 2 hours a day before work, and that's all. That's it really. And then some time at the weekend. So everything is going to take a lot longer from now on.
Yeah.
It sounds very disciplined, your approach. I'm in awe of it. I think the 2 hours a day before work sounds like it makes your days very long.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I get up about 5:30, and then I usually write about 5:45 until 7:45.
Nice.
And then I take the dog out, and then I come back, and then I do my working day, and then take the dog out again, and then settle down for the evening, basically. But when I'm on deadline, I'll be writing during my lunch hour, and then after dog walk and dinner in the evening, I'll then do another couple of hours, because it's that's just the nature of the beast when you're working as well.
Yeah.
It's got to be done. You've got a deadline, so you just got to knuckle down and do it, really.
I've got to be honest with you, Anna.
Yeah.
I'm in awe because sometimes I get up roughly 16 minutes before the bus I have to catch for work. I do make it,
But
to be fair.
I mean, I do work from home though, so it does make a difference. So I do. If I had to get up, walk the dog, and then commute, I really don't know where I'd be. Apart from I'd be trying to write on the bus or the train, and wouldn't be getting very far, because I mean, one, you've got to get a seat, and two, you've probably got a screaming child or a drunk sitting next to you or whatever.
Somebody jostling you, or even worse, reading over your shoulder.
Reading over your shoulder. Yeah.
I hope that's the first draft, love. Imagine
what
that.
happens next? Scroll down. What happens next?
You're not going to leave it there, are you?
Yeah, I've got to get off. No.
Yeah, you get people travelling all the way to your stop.
I mean, that would be extremely flattering.
It would be, wouldn't it? But also potentially very creepy.
Annoying.
Invasive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess there's always a fine line between these things.
Yeah, I was actually waiting at a bus stop years ago, and I had a notebook, and I was jotting down some notes for something that I was writing. Probably Godblind for the 14th time. And there was a guy standing in the bus stop at the other end, and I was there for about 5-10 minutes, and obviously I sort of kept glancing up to see if the bus had come, and I could see this guy out the corner of my eye. And after about 10 minutes, he came marching up to me and got right up in my face and went, "Are you writing about me?"
Oh, shit.
I was like, "No." He's like, "You keep staring at me and writing something. I want to see what you're writing." I was like, "Okay."
God.
If only it had been the hammer scene. God damn
Oh,
it. That
yeah.
would have been perfect. But
Just watch
yeah,
him go
he was
pale and run away.
yeah, he was really aggressive about it.
That's horrible.
And I was like,
That doesn't sound like he
dude,
was very
back
stable.
off. No, well, possibly not, but
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Sorry that happened.
Well, let's say they were his bollocks you've immortalised in fiction then.
Yeah, why not? String him up.
yeah, let's just we'll pretend it's him from now on.
So I can speak for myself when I say so far you've actually really been inspiring me in our chat,
thank
because
you.
you
I'd agree.
are you just speak so positively about your process, and it's really lovely. But in terms of other authors, who inspires you?
I'm gonna go wildly off genre, and I'm
Excellent.
going to say that I recently discovered, in translation, an author called Mieko Kawakami. She's a Japanese author, and I recently got the translation of her latest novel, which is called All the Lovers in the Night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a proofreader in modern Tokyo whose life slowly falls apart. And on the surface, there should be nothing about that book that attracts me. It's modern fiction. It's not speculative at all. It's extremely introspective. The writing style, even translated, I've read quite a few Japanese novels, and it seems to be a trait of Japanese authors that they write in this incredibly sparse style.
Yeah.
They don't really delve deeply into emotions and things like that. And there shouldn't be anything about that book that ticks my boxes. And I couldn't put it down. I was completely and utterly drawn into this slow disintegration of a life. And it's just absolutely phenomenal. And I would also, so I put up there with that also, The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima, who he wrote it back in the 1950s. And he was a Japanese author who, after that, he wrote his great series of 4 books. And he always said when he finished his 4th book, he would commit ritual suicide in the way of the samurai.
Yeah.
And he did.
Fuck.
He finished the draft of the book. He said he mailed it off to his editor. And before he even had his edits back, he'd killed himself, which I do actually understand the impulse.
That's you've got some faith in your draft at that stage, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, fuck you if you think I'm going to edit this again, mate.
That's fucking
but
wild.
yeah, he did. He because he said he would never be able to write again after he had completed this series. That it was the epitome of who he was and the pinnacle of his art.
That made me feel kind of cold all over.
Yeah,
story. That's really scary.
Being so sure that was your magnum opus that you were like only death.
And that being the entirety of your life, so your life has now ended.
Yeah, it's amazing. There is, I mean, there's various biographies about him out there that actually go into all of the psychology behind it, which I don't actually know in depth.
What was the name of the fellow again? Sorry.
The name of the author was Yukio Mishima, and the novel that I mentioned was The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea.
Wow!
And it is a phenomenal book. It's very, very short, and it's just a tour de force from start to finish.
Wow. Have you ever sort of delved into Murakami?
Yes, I've read a few of his. Yeah. I think he's probably slightly closer to the fantasy, isn't he? Because he's always got something.
Yeah, there's something.
There's quite often something a little bit off or a little bit odd. I remember reading Sputnik Sweetheart many years ago and absolutely fallen in love with that book.
It was After Dark for me. The one that really just sort of got me. But
in terms of like your more fantasy and your sci-fi in Japanese authorship, you're far more likely to get it from a mangaka than an author, aren't you? I think that's where a lot of that ends up.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It almost seems to be that novels are sort of reserved for serious literary endeavors, and you can kind of go as crazy as you want with manga. Yeah, I think that's probably true. In terms of sort of genre authors who inspire me, I feel like I should probably try and hit that question the way you probably meant for me to. I'd say one of my big favorites, someone who is like an auto buy. As soon as she's got a new book out, I go and read it, is Jen Williams. Absolutely. I mean, the Winnow in Flame trilogy is just phenomenal. And I was lucky enough, I got an arc recently for her newest one, Talon Sister.
Oh, cool.
And she's just, she just has that real sweet spot of massive emotion and ridiculous banter. And she just gets it perfectly balanced. And so, there'll be all this pathos and these horror, and it's all very sad, and then someone's like, oh, you flaming asshole, and it just it just sort of lightens it when it needs lightening, or it just sort of it sort of shows you the inherent absurdity of the situation, and but without detracting from the emotional depth of it. It's really, really difficult to do, I think. And Jen Williams, she pretty much nails it every time.
I love that.
Fantastic.
I mean, I could go on.
And I would straight up listen to you as well, but we've got some other questions, I guess, that we should try and get to. But that's what a throw. I'm still like reeling from the seppuku thing. That was wild.
I'm genuinely worried one day we're going to get George R.R. Martin on the podcast and Ben's going to be like, well, that's it for me. Pass me the Tanto. Fuck.
God damn it. There is no way that's the zenith. A man who can't write a fucking novel in 16 years. Yeah, I'm not.
Have you finally snapped? Sorry, this is a beautiful moment.
He's not. At this stage, he's not a writer, man. He's actually not a writer. Like, I really hate to like slam him, but it's just actually ridiculous.
Fine,
he's a TV writer for sure, but he's not a novelist. He's not a fantasy author.
Fine, Robin Hobb. There you go.
Yeah, well, I would love to speak to Robin Hobb, but
we'd all like to speak to Robin Hobb.
Yeah.
Please tell me you're listening, Robin. Please come on. Please come on.
But Anna, this one's kind of an interesting one. We've always woven in music in some way, especially because Nico is a musician. But have you ever associated a song or a piece of music with one of your characters, perhaps even as you're writing them, or if the song reminds you of them?
There's a particular scene in book 3 of Songs of the Drowned that's should be out at the end of this year, that is directly inspired by an episode of a Korean drama. And I actually have the soundtrack to the show, which I listened to pretty much on repeat while I was drafting that novel. So I suppose in a way, because of what happens in the show, that I sort of took as inspiration and made my own, and as one of the big climaxes of the book, that maybe that piece of music or that soundtrack sort of relates to it. Probably
I
the
like
closest I can come, to be honest.
One of the things that's just struck me, and it's obviously I'm being a bit slow here, but it does seem like you are quite deliberate in the way that you're pan-cultural in your influences and your approaches to writing. Is that something you're consciously doing, or is it just quite naturally where your attention leads you?
I think like an awful lot of white Westerners, I grew up reading a lot of white Western fiction and watching all of the British dramas and Hollywood shows and or American TV and American movies and all that kind of stuff. And I think about 5 or 6 years ago, so I mean it's not something I've been doing for a very long time, I suddenly got so bored of, or what should we watch on TV tonight? Oh God, nothing. I genuinely, we can flick through 500 channels and I can't find a single thing that I want to watch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, big time.
And I've always, because I did Shotokan karate for quite some years, and so I've always been sort of quite fascinated by Japan and East Asia and East Asian culture and stuff like that. And my husband, it was actually my husband who recommended the Mishima book to me. And the only reason that he knew it was because it was David Bowie's favorite book.
Oh wow!
So he had bought a copy of it and read it because he was, he wanted to know why David Bowie loved it so much. So he said, well, read this. It's David Bowie's favorite book. So I kind of came to it very, sort of obliquely. And then, as I said, that book absolutely blew my mind. And I was like, I cannot imagine a Westerner having written a story like this.
Yeah.
And so then I was just like, well, then there's got to be loads more out there, hasn't there? And that was what really sort of kick-started me into searching out, so, looking for, first off, books in translation. And it wasn't really until sort of the last, like 5 years when Netflix has really had a huge influx of foreign language drama, that I've really had the access to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, now I would say I watch as much stuff in translation as I do stuff in English. Just because, you can watch a historical period drama about, a revenge story in English, and then you can watch something that is almost exactly the same, but it's set in Japan or Korea. And what I really love doing is seeing what they put focus on compared to what we put focus on. So we're all about the why are you doing it, and they're all about the family honor, and we're about this and they're about that. And it just gives you a different way of looking at things like conflict. And because conflict, you can't write a novel without there being some sort of conflict. It doesn't need to be a war. It can be, a political decision. It can be a famine. It's still a conflict, isn't it? It's still something that needs to be faced and challenged and overcome. And so just looking at how other cultures deal with conflict and the things that are important to other cultures really has sort of broadened how I see how I see story tropes, and what might be important.
That's such an exciting answer, because also in there you've got the how conflict begins is different as well, but by what you were saying about it being different, having different importance in different cultures. The thing that jumped immediately into my mind was Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is a remake of Macbeth, but by Kurosawa. And the focus is it has very similar themes, and obviously it's the same overall story, but the focus is in different places. And there's a lot of storytelling that happens with facial expressions from Toshiro Mifune. Wow, that's. I think
it's like the Seven Samurai getting. It's like the Seven Samurai getting remade as the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
And if you think about the differences and similarities between the two films, and you can see, you can see how they Americanized it, and where they put what their ideas of honor and duty are compared to the Japanese ideas of honor and duty. And it's just really fascinating to me to make those sort of comparisons.
Oh wow, we've really got into it here, haven't we? I'm really enjoying it. And
I didn't even start talking about Godzilla, so we swerved about 4 hours there.
Yeah, you narrowly avoided losing your whole evening to that one, Anna.
So we touched on tropes briefly there, but are there any you actively avoid in your own writing?
I haven't yet written a chosen one narrative.
Okay.
Well, have I? The Godblind trilogy possibly comes the closest. There's a prophet called Dom, who he's not really the chosen one. He has been cursed by the gods to be able to see the future. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're so blessed you can see the future," and he's like, "No, I'm really fucking not. This is terrible." And then there's another character who that he suspects that he might be destined to be something, and he really doesn't want to be it, so he sort of tries to actively avoid it as long as possible. So I've kind of come about them.
Hero trope there, maybe.
Yeah, sort of come about them arse about face, really.
And obviously there's this idea that sometimes that tropes are bad in some way, but well deployed, well executed, and in a refreshing kind of way, I think they have, obviously they're a trope for a reason, aren't they?
Yeah, they gained that status somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there are any bad tropes, to be honest. I think they can, as you say, they can be badly executed. They can be massively overdone. They can be very, very tiring. But also, I mean, the next project that I'm going to be working on, which I can't really talk about because I mean we're literally just at the vibes stage rather than any sort of coherent plot stage.
Oh, I love that there's a vibe stage. That's great. Go on, please continue.
Definitely a vibe stage. But what I'm actually thinking about doing is taking a lot of my favorite tropes and just leaning into them. And just going, you know what? I want to see a moonlit duel on a rooftop. I'm going to bloody well write one, and
cool.
Exactly. And so I think, if you ask me this in a couple of years, I might have a very different answer for you, because it will be more a case of what trope haven't I written?
Yeah. I think there's a great case for them though. Like Pratchett was absolutely masterful at picking up a trope and not only deconstructing it in his comedy and in the way it happened in the books, but also absolutely hitting the trope. So you're both getting it and getting that sort of under the table. We all know it's a bit silly, but I think, like Ben says, deployed well. There are authors like Terry who could just pick up any type of narrative. I mean, he played football novel, didn't he? So like you could do
I mean, admittedly, that one was potentially a little bit shaky. I mean, I love Pratchett, but that Unseen Academicals was an interesting choice.
The
I think
Romeo and Juliet football novel is a bit weird.
It's not one of my
Godblind, yeah.
favourite. It's not one of my favourites. I'll
It's
be
not in the
honest.
top 30.
But is it Guards where they do the one in a million chance whole section?
Work. Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's not a 1 in a million chance. We've got to make it harder, and you end up with someone stood on one leg, blindfolded, trying to do the shot. Yeah. Oh,
and the old 1 in a million chances actually work out 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's just taking two like phrases and jamming them together, but actually in a way that makes sense.
Absolutely,
which is
fantastic.
deeply annoying that you managed to do that. Yeah.
So you've actually perfectly answered what was going to be our next question anyway, which is what's your next project? And it's a moonlight jewel on a rooftop. We've got it, nailed it.
That's it. That is all I can say about that one at the moment. I would love. Honestly, I'm bursting with excitement to write this one. I can't wait to get on with it. But I also don't want to give it all away because I've got to. We've still got to pitch it and sell it before let alone anything else. So, hopefully, though, this one will come to something.
Well, when it does, which I'm absolutely certain it will be, having heard your writing today and spoken to you about your, really engaging outlook on writing, I'm sure it will come to fruition. So when it does happen, feel free to come back on and talk about it with us because I'd love to talk to you about it.
Definitely, will do.
But for the moment, where is the best place for people to keep up to date with your news?
Okay, so there is my website, which I do need to update a little bit actually, but that is anna-stevens.com, Stevens with the PH, and then I'm on all of the usual socials, so Facebook, Twitter, for as long as that lasts, Instagram and Blue Sky. I'm on those. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky as Anna Smith Writes because Smith is my married name. But if you just search Anna Stevens, you should find me.
And I've actually just got one last question before we release you back into the wild. You're obviously a black belt in karate, which is really cool, and also a HEMA practitioner. With the Italian longsword, I believe, which is
slightly lapsed, but yes.
Yeah. Is that the reason that you're a qualified first aider?
That's a good question, man.
It is not, but it's bloody useful to have, I'll tell you that.
Just in case you kick someone's head off or cut them in half.
Yeah. I did actually get my cheekbone broken at a sword class once. Entirely through my own fault. I did have a fencing helmet on, but I didn't have a steel sword at that point, and somebody lent me theirs. Oh, this is perfect. This is a great fantasy fact for you as well. But because every longsword is made to your specifications, so your height, your reach, etc., the sword that I borrowed was slightly too big for me. So the crossguard was longer than I was used to. So there's a position called posta di donna where you basically have the sword over your shoulder, and then it sort of the blade rests on the front of your shoulder, and then you bring it over and downwards, like in a downward slash towards your opponent's head. So I went to make that move, but because this sword was a little bit longer and bigger than I was used to, as I angled it, I caught the edge of the crossguard under my own fencing mask, ripped my mask off just as my opponent smacked me in the head.
Holy shit.
And obviously, if I'd have still... Complete fluke. If I'd still had my helmet on, it would have just rung my bell and that would have been it. But yes.
God damn.
It was amazing. I had such a good black eye and a hairline fracture in my cheek.
Anna, you're really fucking cool, don't you? Do you know that? Are you aware?
How did that happen? Oh, that was when I got stabbed in the face with a sword. Yeah.
It makes everybody cool, doesn't it?
It's just, does this thing not happen to everyone?
I mean, that actually quite literally happens in a Joe Abercrombie book to one of the characters. He gets a serious injury that changes his outlook on life, and all of a sudden he's very relatable.
Yes, it's Jezzel, isn't it? Jezzel Dan Luther.
Dan Luther, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So
what,
that's it. Just call me Jez, man.
Jez. Well, Jez.
Well, Jez.
It's been a pleasure.
We've actually come to the end. I feel like that's a wonderful place to leave it on. But I'd just like to thank you again, not only for your wonderful answers to our questions, but also your excellent short story in the previous episode. And if anybody has, for whatever reason, skipped that episode, you have to go back and listen to Anna's story because it's wonderful.
And your company. We've got to thank you for your company.
Absolutely,
You've been so fun.
Well, thank you. Same straight back at you. It's been very, very good questions. And just some really good general conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah. All right. Well, until next time, we'll say goodbye for now.
Okay.
Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?